Okay, today's video is going to be relatively short. It's a fairly simple skill that I'm going to run through twice just to make sure that everything makes sense. We're going to start to incorporate Photoshop into our processing videos now, and I'm going to show you how I do that. So I do always start in Lightroom, and then I send my images to Photoshop for some advanced techniques. And then I send them back to Lightroom, which is where I do all my final touches and exporting. So we'll take this image for example. You can see over here on the right hand side that I have made some modifications, done some adjustments, and gotten it fairly close to where I want it. There are just a couple things we're going to do in Photoshop. So before we actually send it to Photoshop, I'm going to run through some settings that you will need to understand before we actually go to Photoshop. So first, go to your Lightroom menu and click on Preferences. In your Preferences panel, make sure you're on the External Editing tab, and you will see right here in this first box it's already set to Edit in Photoshop CC 2015. That's what it defaults to. I am using Lightroom and Photoshop CC, so they came already set up like that. If you do not have Photoshop installed, this isn't going to show up, or it may be grayed out. You will need to set that up before continuing. But we're going to assume that you've got Photoshop installed. We're just going to adjust the settings that Lightroom uses when it sends images to Photoshop. So we're going to use the format TIFF. And the only reason why is the PSD files don't show up in your Lightroom library. The TIFF is a little bit more universal. That and TIFF can handle a larger file size. The PSD maxes out at 2 gigs. The TIFF can go to 4. So for really advanced editing, the TIFF is just a little bit better for heavier weight edits. I stick to Adobe RGB 1998 for my color space. Bit depth is 8, and the only reason for that is when you go to 16 bits in Photoshop, there are certain effects and controls that you cannot use with a 16-bit image. They're only available in 8-bit. And for what I do, keeping it at 8 bits is just fine. There's no reason to go to 16. I keep my resolution at 300 pixels per inch. And a compression, I'll set this to none. There's no need to hit the save button because there isn't one. You just hit the X when you're done. And every time we send an image to Photoshop, those settings will be used. So to edit this in Photoshop, we're going to right click, Edit in, and then Photoshop will show up right there at the top. Okay, now we're in Photoshop. If we were to go to image size, you'll see that all of these settings have been transferred over from Lightroom. We're at 300 pixels per inch. Everything is what we told it to do in Lightroom. So for illustration purposes, I'm just going to turn this image grayscale really quick, and that'll show you just a very basic difference in the image. Now, at this point, we've made an adjustment. The image is different than what it was in Lightroom. When I save it, all I have to do is hit save. You watch this image name up here. It will change from a CR2 to a TIFF file, because that is what Lightroom told it to use as its file type. So when I hit save, it is now saving it as a TIFF. And if we go back to Lightroom, you can see that it is shown up there now next to the original as the TIFF file. So that's pretty much it as far as sending images to Photoshop and back to Lightroom. That's about as complicated as it gets. Make sure your external edit settings have been set up beforehand, and you should be good to go. Beyond this, everything else we do in Photoshop will come into later tutorials in the future. So we'll just run through it one more time. We'll use this image. So we right click, edit in Photoshop. Now yours may say a different version of Photoshop, but the handling is all the same. It doesn't really matter. Click it. And there we are in Photoshop. I'm just going to do a very simple adjustment. We're going to colorize it, make it sepia. And when I save it, remember, File, Save, that will change from a .cr2 to the TIFF file that we told it to use when we sent it from Lightroom. So we'll save, and once it's done, it will show up back in our Lightroom catalog next to the original. And there we go. There's our sepia version, and there's our original. When you hover over, you can see the file name is right here. You can see it's that TIFF file that we told it to use. So that is pretty much it. There's no reason to elaborate further. I told you the video is going to be short. Beyond this, you will start to see me incorporating more and more Photoshop into these processing videos. So if you ever forget how to go back and forth between Lightroom and Photoshop, you can always come back and reference this video and run through it again. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the next one. It is coming soon. And don't forget, make sure to comment below if you want your topic to be the next one that I cover.